17th, is it? Friday night, February 19, 1982. And we have the second night of the relationship class round 2. I'm sure that any of you who can get here at 7:25 or 7:30 would be able to come at 7:15. And it would be immensely to your advantage to do that. Why? Because that's when the meditation begins. And the objective that we have in this class is to bring about changes. And the human mind, what we call the octopus, more about that in a minute, the human mind does not like changing. Therefore, in order to change and to welcome change and to be willing to change, you have to have something else operating for you besides your human mind. That we call your indwelling God consciousness. That same God consciousness that we were talking about last week when I said that there's nothing but God consciousness and role-playing. Now, it's what the Master calls the kingdom being like leaven. It is as if everybody brought with him when he came here a candle. It isn't lit. In fact, some of you have candles that are lit. Some of you have candles that are not yet lit. What do we mean? I mean by that you are not yet consciously aware of the fact that God constitutes your individual being and identity. You're not aware of that yet. It's like having money in the bank, but you don't know the name of the bank. It's right there, ready, willing, and able to be tapped by every man, woman, and child on earth who first accepts the fact that it's a possibility and then takes the recipe for getting in conscious contact with that. Now, meditation is the way to do that, but you can't do it for yourself because your candle isn't lit. And therefore you have to bring it up against a candle that is lit. And then, as you get closer and closer, it gets warmer and warmer, and yours takes light. And I love this metaphor of the Masters, because you can see that in lighting this other candle, it takes nothing of the light away from this one. This one is still burning fully, and so this one is lit. Another one can be lit from that, and another one can be lit from that. And that's what the Master means about the kingdom of God being like leaven. That when there is a conscious contact with the indwelling Spirit, and two or more are gathered together, there is an impartation, not a transfer. Because you see, it isn't transfer when it's brought to there, it's one. And then it seems to move into a difference, but it's the same light. It's like electricity can light a lot of light bulbs, but it's all the same electricity. So, changing will be easier for you if you get this thing within you operating towards your growth and health. And that's best done in these meditation sessions before we begin. In fact, those 10 or 15 minutes of meditation will ultimately prove to be of more value to you than the whole hour or hour and a half of talking that comes after it. So if you can't have both, choose for the meditation. All right, I'm going to remind you of a couple of things. One, this is a class in relationships, but not parent-child relationships. This is a class which is searching out new role models in adult relationships, with the possibility in due course, having learned how to do the relationship right, that relationship exercised will result in equality of the two members, and then friendship is a possibility. Now, here's another axiom, if I didn't give it to you last week. There is no friendship possible except between equals. And that is why there's no friendship possible between parents and children. The child has to go away, get his own equality, and come back as an equal before you can be friends. Now, it's true that the parent can be a friend to the child if the parent is an adult, because it can be a one-way street if you're really an adult. But don't expect that child to be your friend, because that's an impossibility until he recognizes himself as your equal. Does anybody have any question or argument within him to that? Is that too hard to accept? You see, the good parent then has to be willing to wait 20, 25 years to be friends with his children. You can be a lot of other exciting, wonderful things. You can appreciate your children. You can enjoy them, believe it or not. But you can't be friends in the sense that you're going to learn how to be friends as adult equals in this class. All right. Now then, we are developing a contractual concept that has to do with behavior only. We have to give up trying to exercise thought control over anybody. It's only the relationship behavior that this class deals with. And as I mentioned, I think last week, you'll find out that behavior resolves itself mostly into changing your dialogue. When you can see and change your dialogue, the changed behavior follows. All right? Now then, last week I gave you the first of the non-negotiables. A non-negotiable, I remind you, is an element of relationship without which you are not willing to function in a relationship. And conversely, you are not willing to function in a relationship if its opposite is present. And last week we took up courtesy versus rudeness, and as I told you, there are 10 non-negotiables in relationship in this implicit contract. And we will take them up in ascending order of difficulty. Therefore, you know that the one we had to work with last week is the easiest. Now, we were able to take, as I mentioned, a whole year to do this class before, and we have only 16 weeks to do it now. And I have to go fast, but it's all going to be there. You may have, when you leave here, the feeling that I've stuffed your head like a sausage, but the tapes will be available, and after this 16 weeks is over, and I have gone to Rome, the tapes will still be run, and you will be able to study them. Or if there's one subject, one non-negotiable, for instance, if you say, well, I didn't really catch on that one too well, then find out when that one's going to be redone and come in and hear it as often as you like until you feel comfortable with it. Now, it took us a long time to do this before, but I'm going to have to telescope a lot, so I'll jump right in and ask questions. Usually, the way I prefer to work is a strictly workshop class where I just ask a lot of questions and the class discovers itself the principles. But I'll have to lead you a little bit in the interest of time during this next 16 weeks, because to try to put into 16 weeks what took us 52 weeks is not going to be all that easy. But I do want to ask you this question. Did you think over the week at all about the subject of non-negotiables in your relationship? And did you understand what a non-negotiable is and why it is? Okay. Nobody has any problem with that? Yes, Tom. I can't hear you, dear. I'm sorry. All right. Well, you can hold your question then, and if it comes up again, by all means, bring it up. Because I'm going to ask you now to think. Is for you, because, another way I've always taught is it's always a private class taught publicly. I mean, it's one-on-one. There just happens to be a lot of one in this room. So when I ask you, I'm not asking you generically, I'm really asking every one of you individually, do you really feel that courtesy is a non-negotiable? Michelle?
Absolutely. There's no way to get off the ground in a relationship without, if you don't have courtesy to start with, there's no clear thinking of your thoughts, because you're either worried about getting into emotional steel or defending yourself or what have you. So courtesy for me, absolutely, I had an experience this week that I had to constantly check myself for courtesy. And if I didn't, if I overstepped the line just a little bit, I lost my whole...
You lost your track.
Lost my whole
Yeah,
track.
lost your track. All right, so there we've heard from one person who says, yes, courtesy is a non-negotiable. How about the rest of you? Do you see courtesy as that all-fired important? Todd?
Okay, I feel I have an obligation to myself and to anyone in my life to be courteous to them. But it's not negotiable and judge myself. I don't think that someone is courteous to me on following the path, using that social term, either in a secular way, humanistically, in a spiritual way, to tell them that that's not negotiable and therefore this is going on, and therefore they know it is.
Okay. It's very well expressed, and it's an excellent observation. Todd says, I feel I must follow the rule of courtesy as a non-negotiable, but not necessarily somebody else out there. Aha, but you see, I will remind you that I said last week that we thought we were developing the non-negotiables to lay on somebody else. Okay, you want a relationship with me, then this is what you have to do. And about halfway through the class, in some 10, 15 weeks into the class, all of a sudden it was made very clear that the challenge was for numero uno. That the challenge was up to me. Can I fulfill in a relationship these 10 non-negotiables? And if I can't, I have no right to ask anybody else to do it. So that it talks quite correctly, and I would agree with that completely, that if I'm going to follow this path of right behavior, that that's all I'm responsible for. I'm not responsible for my thoughts nor my feelings. I am only responsible for my behavior. And therefore, it is up to me to challenge myself with the non-negotiables. But here's where I think perhaps, Thomas, you don't have it clear exactly, and that is that you don't lay anything on any human being who has not specifically expressed a desire to enter into a relationship with you. See, this is a class in relationship. This means two adults negotiating behavior. Well, naturally, if it's my boss or somebody who has not at all said to me, I want to enter into a relationship with you, I have no business saying, well, I have some non-negotiables I want to talk about, because, they would give me my walking papers. Because that's a 3D world out there. And they wouldn't even, they would think we were crazy even to talk about things that we talk about, because we're moving towards the fourth dimension. So that, remember, these are also ideals that are being held up. Now, I want to make something very clear. In all of Joel's teaching, and Joel is my spiritual teacher, as you know, and indirectly yours, always made it very clear that his message of the infinite way was not an absolute message. And so did the Master, by the way, in the New Testament, make it exceedingly clear, and so did Paul, that they were both talking about a world of seeming duality, where there were two standards of behavior and understanding. And the 3D world is composed exactly of those double standards of behavior. But this that we are dealing with now is a fourth dimensional activity, and it is absolute. You don't get, I've heard Joel be angry about somebody in a class saying, don't go absolute on me. And he was absolutely right, because, no pun intended, because he was talking to a group of students who were still struggling in their dual natures, and now we are presuming that you are ready to give up the duality of your nature, that you are ready to move into integrity of personality, into oneness of behavior, and that behavior of the fourth dimensional order. So that when we, granted we're studying and we're practicing, we're going to fall short for a long time. But that doesn't change the ideal that we're shooting for. And we, along with seeing that we're shooting for an ideal, we have to recognize that what we're shooting for is an absolute with not one deviation, not one, that we will try to justify. Now, we're going to fall short. How do you get into trouble and how do you get out? Let's talk about that for a minute. You're going to fall short. Of course I fall short. What do you do when you fall short of this standard that you yourself have set up for yourself? Nobody else has laid it on you. What do you do? Michelle? Of course. What else? Whoops, I made a mistake. And that's all there is to it. And you, as Michelle says, you get up, you wipe off the blood, and march for today. Yesterday you cannot do one thing about. Yesterday is gone forever, with its mistakes, with its ignorances, with its falling short. It's gone. You can't do a thing about it, except learn from it. That's the only value a mistake ever has, is maybe it can teach us something. We learn from it, it becomes a footstool on which we climb higher. Yes, you're going to fall short. That doesn't change the ideal that we're setting up at all. And when you do fall short, the only thing to do with a mistake is quickly to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Now, if you recognize that somebody else is making a mistake, this other person with whom you are in a relationship situation, and you recognize that somebody is making a mistake, what do you do to be the right kind of person in a relationship? Michelle? Absolutely. If you recognize that somebody has emotion operating in him, because there are no valid emotions, the octopus has you. The instant emotion enters, the octopus has got you. So that recognizing that for myself and recognizing that for my brother, the most loving thing that I can do if I find somebody in an emotional situation, and I want to talk about how you recognize it in a moment, the most loving thing I can do is, hey, I'm going to give you time and space. I'm not going to talk about this anymore now. I'm going to be quiet and gather myself together, and I'm going to give you time and space. And that person, who is a person of goodwill, because that's one of the axioms of this. If you're not a person of goodwill, you're in the wrong place. Because we assume that if you're sitting in a class of this nature, and you're talking about changing role models on relationship, you are a person of goodwill. Now that you can never forget. When you're dealing with somebody in a relationship, you have to keep in mind, what kind of person am I dealing with? I am dealing essentially with a person of goodwill. Therefore, that emotion must be dealt with by allowing that person time and space to correct himself. Now, how do you recognize... Well, no, I'm going to talk about the nature of the octopus first. Another name for the octopus is the human mind. And when we get our signs back up on the wall there will be one that says, your humanhood is your mistake-making faculty. Period. And when one really comes to see that, and I will demonstrate it over and over so that you will see it, and you will recognize it in yourself, it becomes, the idea of giving up our humanhood becomes very easy. Because in giving up our humanhood, we talk about the destruction of the ego in this work. We talk about the giving up of our humanhood in this work. But you must understand what we're talking about. We are talking about the destruction of that part of you that declares that you are not God consciousness. That's the me. And it's not your friend, it's your enemy. The humanhood is that erroneous conclusion maker, that misinterpreter of appearances that brings you to false conclusions, and we call it your mistake-making faculty. And the more wisdom you acquire, and there's a lot of wisdom on these walls when we get our signs back up, so take some time to look at them. The more wisdom you acquire, the more you recognize that any time your octopus has you in its grip, you have become a victim. And the whole world is going around today being victimized by this hypnotizer that keeps telling us what we are not. And we believe it and fall into it, and anything you've got up here, you're going to outpicture. So this is where it has to be changed. Now then, one thing to know about the octopus, it's a child, a total and complete child. It is not an adult, never will be an adult, and therefore its ego demands are insatiable. Now, what about ego demand? Let's put this in terms of a child, for instance. A child's ego demands are insatiable. And any parent has a right to defend himself against the insatiable ego demands of his children. And there are methods for doing that. That's another class. I'm not going to get into it. You can extrapolate what you learn about adults into the children relationship after you know enough about this. But you must accept the fact that anybody's child is insatiable monster. Therefore, if you're in a relationship and somebody's octopus gets hold of him, and you will recognize it because the emotion rises, there's no use any longer in continuing that conversation because you are dealing with an irrational object. The octopus is not rational and cannot be reasoned with. Not ever, not ever, not ever. The only thing to do with the octopus is to refuse to deal with it. Take yourself away. I'm going to give you time and space, and let that person correct himself, and when he is calm or she is calm, now we will discuss it again, as long as you're calm. But if emotion enters again, you're going to fail. There's not any use at all, and you know, those of you who had this all last year, and that's over half the class, knows that what I am saying is absolute fact. The rest of you, of course, do not. You'll have to practice it to find that out. But you can suffer trying to deal with somebody's octopus as long as you want to. You can try and try and try, and you will fail and fail and fail, degree for degree. The hard part is the fact that when we still have a big charge of child within us, that rises in emotion with us, and we really don't want a solution then. We just want to hit somebody. You know, we want a battle. Dr. Byrne, and let me recommend that book if all of you haven't read it, Dr. Byrne's book, Games People Play. It is really something that everybody should have under his belt if he doesn't have it under his belt. In any event, he has a game that people play called Uproar. And very often it's just a substitute for sex. And people play Uproar game, and they have no intention of reaching a solution or peace in the relationship. They want the excitement. Now, I'm assuming that there's nobody like that in here. I am assuming you all want to grow up, that you want harmonious and meaningful relationships, and that you are willing to change any aspect of your character that has damaged your relationship. Okay? Yes?
The one question that comes up is relating back to the class of last year. I was fortunate to get on stage with everyone.
Yes.
And again crops up in my mind. It's a reactionary type of question. Offer the feeling, the response that one gets from someone else. Understanding that all feelings are valid.
Right.
The crossover between that, the difference between that and an emotion, a response to whether it's something you said, Trish, anyone in this room said. How do we come to the conclusion of deciphering, is that a valid feeling or an allowing my answer?
I don't know how you missed the definition. We did it last week. There is a definition, an absolute rule of thumb. Feelings have no dialogue whatsoever connected with them, and emotions always have. So if there's a piece of dialogue, you shouldn't, I should, I wish, I won't, I want.
Yeah,
that's emotion.
He always.
Or he always, or she always, or why don't, you know? Yeah. Any language at all is emotion. Feeling has no language going with it at all. And now it's very important to understand not only the difference between feeling and emotion, because emotions are never valid, whereas feelings, as I mentioned last week, are all that there is that's real about you at any given moment. But it's also important to know that those feelings, whereas we don't have to justify them, they may not be justifiable. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, we don't have to, because it's mine, and I have it. But feelings change. And that's why we don't have to justify them, is because I have the feeling that I have exactly because of where my head is at this moment. And it's valid, and I must respect it. I not only must respect it, I must trust it. And I must learn to go with it. Why? Because even if it's not what it will be a year from now, if I deny it, I'm literally committing suicide. You see, I have to allow myself fully to be at whatever moment. Whatever I really, really, honestly am, I must allow that to be fully existent at any moment, you see. And the only thing that we don't do is deal with that crazy dialogue, you see. That you need to go away and find your feeling, which the dialogue of the emotion will only hide from you with all of that mind whip. You see, the mind wants to run your life. The mind is an instrument of intellectual awareness. It should be your instrument, not your master. But down through the ages, we're so used to deifying the mind, especially since the 18th century, that we really take this crazy mind whip, this good and evil thing, and in and out, and this crazy monster, and submit to it as if it knew what the heck it were doing. And it doesn't ever. But feelings have to be dealt with. Emotions, out, go away. If you dignify it, in fact, I'm going to give you an image. The instant that you feel emotion arising in you, you have opened the petcock of your blood, and you are now delivering your blood to that octopus, which is not in you at all but outside of you. In other words, it whispers, the octopus whispers in our ear, this is how you feel, this is what you think, this is what you ought to do. We're not conscious of that. It feels like it's inside. But after you become adept at seeing the difference between emotion and feeling, after you become adept at learning to listen to the real voice within you, and then the whisperers, you can recognize by what it's doing which it is. One is always destructive, and the other one never is. And the destructive one has only one goal, that you shall be upset. Now, if saying white is white today in your ear can make you upset, that's what you hear. But if you adjust to that, then tomorrow it'll tell you black is white. Because it doesn't care what it is about as long as you are upset. Its entire goal is to keep you stewing, because the instant that you stew, you open the petcock of your blood and it lives. That mind lives. Goes off dancing, hey man, no hands, you know. Whereas it should have a collar on it, and it should be with a saddle and a bridle, and you, the real you, should be in control of that mind whip. Hey, off with you. The only proper function of mind is an avenue of intellectual awareness. You use it to study with. That's all. You use it to study. Anything. The newspaper, the panel show on the television, whatever it is an instrument, like your body is an instrument of physical awareness. Your mind is an instrument of intellectual awareness. Both of them are effect, not cause. And behind all of that known is I, the knower. Now, have I gone too fast and given you too much to absorb for the moment? Because I'll go back over that if you're not following me. Okay. Then let's get back to this one thing. Number one, you're going to hear a lot of talk about the octopus, because that's the only trouble you're going to have in dealing with anybody in the world, including yourself. Sometimes we get to where we handle our own octopus, our own whisperer quite well, recognize it very well, and then succumb and yield to somebody else's. Well, that only holds back your progress. Progress towards what? Towards peace. Now, I want to repeat the question. Is courtesy a non-negotiable? Who would say yes? Let me see a show of hands. Okay, let me see hands on no, it's not a non-negotiable. Meaning I can survive in a relationship without it. I'm going to table that for a moment, Toss, because I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it because we were talking previously about your being careful to have a number of people in the field. No, I just think you haven't looked at it yet. Because you were talking about having a number of people in the field so that if someone disappointed you, you always had friends that you could go to. Well, so then I'm asking you this question. Have you ever really stayed up against a relationship where there was discourtesy and rudeness and decided you were going to stay in it in spite of that? Well, we talked about, we defined rudeness last week. We defined rudeness. Certainly yelling was so obvious that it really hardly needs to be spoken about. But we said sarcasm, rude language, being humiliated, being interrupted, being nagged, and somebody usurping my place in life. That's rudeness.
There's a baseline, and one person I may consider them to be functioning at a two-minus level, and I think they're wonderful for the same thing. And someone else is like a minus level, but that person might not have.
Okay, I'll buy that, but I will also say this. I will say this, that you have made compromises, and you're willing to make compromises. That's not what this class is about. That's 3D. Believe me, the whole 3D world is nothing but compromise. People practicing tacit consent with each other. They buy peace at any price, simply staying away from subjects that they find are irritating to each other. And in that way they can find a modus operandi where two people can stay in a marriage, for instance, but which I would never dignify by that name. Because there is no relationship going on at all. By virtue of all of the negotiables that we're going to study as being non-negotiables, I would simply say that's no relationship. And that kind of compromise has no place in what we are talking about, which is changing role models. Now, naturally, I'd be the first one to say, don't worry about what anybody else is doing. Here is where I have to make sure that I myself can always operate without rudeness before I have the right to ask it of anybody else. But let's table that, because I think a few weeks from now you'll change your mind. Okay? You can let me know.
Last time, I'd like to say that the through this class, I feel I have improved in whatever way that
Sure.
is holding on.
Sure.
And I think those are probably
Yeah, but I want to make it very clear that we're holding up an ideal here. We are shooting for an ideal. We're never going to make it if you don't know what it is. You know, if we're just wandering around on the ocean and don't know what the ideal is, we are surely not going to make it in relationship. So that's not what this class is all about. Yeah. All right, you may have to, you may, as a matter of practice, you may have to go on making compromises for a long time. But that isn't what this class is about. There are a lot of books I could recommend that will tell you how to make compromises. That isn't what this class is about, because we're exploring new role models, a new way of doing it, not the old way. Yes?
This week I just thought it was interesting that could have happened, because it occurred to me that while viewing myself this week with other people, I realized that courtesy, what it does is it's a giving thing. It's kind of like an opening, like you're opening a pathway towards that person, and rudeness blocks you and puts you in your own little sphere where you can't communicate at all.
Right.
And just for myself, I've spent a lot of my life in my own little sphere and realized that even though it wasn't an active rudeness, was in itself extremely rude, because it was a block. It was not opening up to where somebody was at, or... Oh,
that's interesting. I would say that wasn't a rudeness. That was another problem. We defined last week life as being an organ. The definition of life is an organism able to adapt to its environment and to change.
Yes.
Now, when you were shutting yourself off in your cocoon, by not reaching out, you weren't being rude, you were being dead.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. If we're looking at courtesy is a very alive thing.
Oh, very.
You have a relationship with
very.
them, you have to be able to open that up.
Right.
And be aware of them in order to be courteous.
Well, there isn't one of these non-negotiables that doesn't have to be conscious.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's like the path to relationship. It's thinking that if you can't be courteous, even if you're walking around not affecting or not bumping into anyone, courtesy is an outpouring.
Right, but what you were describing, however, is just being the walking dead.
Yeah.
In other words, an organism that is not responding to its environment. The most important aspect of rudeness last week was this usurping, which is, somebody mentioned, well, if somebody asks you a question and somebody else rushes in and gives the answer, you are usurping that person's place in life. You are actually denying that person's existence. And that's the worst rudeness that there is. And it's possibly the most indulged in. Did anybody have any... Did you all practice courtesy this last week? Consciously and deliberately? How did it work? Any struggles, failures, successes? Adriana?
Well, we had
Sure. You have to pick up your shovel?
Sure, it makes you aware of where you're at. And we did, and we said, God, you if you actually do yourself, if you say as far as making mistakes, you get two speaking through
Sure. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'll do better.
Following the
Yes, Tom.
the suggestion that we make what we want to share. The best thing for us is to meditate together.
Yes.
Also, the best thing for us is when we first get together, meditate together, and get together.
Precisely.
I think that's for us and really, really helpful.
Well, it's going to be helpful to anybody for the simple reason. The reason I do it before a class is not so much for all the rest of you as for my responsibility and obligation to sit here and be an instrument. I want my humanhood out. I don't want to inflict on a student body my humanhood. You haven't come here for that. You have come here for my human God consciousness, developed God consciousness that I can share and impart and put into this room. It's going to light your candle. That's a holy obligation that I take on myself. And so it would be what I do for the class, and what the class does for itself works just as well with two people. If you have the wisdom to say, hey, we'll sit down and get quiet together for a moment, right there you've got God operating in your life. And that takes out the hurt, takes out the meanness, takes out the revenge, takes out all the garbage. Of course it'll work. But I'm not even asking anybody to do that yet. If you are, you're way ahead of the game, and I congratulate you. Yes?
I found French tonight is pretty courteous because the rudeness doesn't come up a lot. But I found that in my life, rudeness is used mostly as kind of a weapon. You know?
Oh, sure. Some people do it deliberately. A weapon.
It's like totally motivated out of not knowing what I feel. You know, I'm rude because I feel I need to be rude, you know, and it's totally wrong.
Well, yeah, another axiom that I will repeat as often as is necessary until you can come to see that at the bottom line of every piece of aberrated behavior is the fact that something or someone has just made you feel powerless. Because to feel powerless is the one emotion that a human being cannot tolerate. I will say that as often as is necessary. So that if you feel rude, you are now in the state of rage. Rage always overlies tears. Tears always overlie a feeling of powerlessness. Yes, Suzanne?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is that if you have an emotion, you're being emotional, is there always a true feeling somehow just going release that somewhere? That you can go and find if you have?
No, because you see, your emotion, this is a little bit difficult to explain, so you'll kind of have to listen through the lines. Your feelings are you, capital Y-O-U, the real whatever you are at that moment. Your emotions you have been conditioned to have. Your emotions are your humanhood, your conditioned mind, the conclusions that you have made based on previous life experience or previous life death or previous life success or previous life failure or some other kind of thing that you have a whole tape recorder of conclusions. 99 and 4400% of them are error, but you come in with those conclusions already formed, and they act as law unto your life and cause you to have emotion. Do you see? So there is a difference. There's a real you there. The emotion is a conditioned response. Always erroneous. Why? Because the only proper response to any appearance or anything that touches your life, a relationship, whatever it is, the only proper response that is totally real would be to recognize there's nothing but God consciousness and role playing, and what's to worry? It's all, is that so? The very fact that you have an emotional reaction is the proof that you have a conditioned reaction. And it's the conditioning that we must be free of. See? So don't try to dignify that. because your octopus will do everything to get you to dignify your emotions, including telling you, if you let go of your emotions, you'll be dead. You won't have anything left. There are a lot of people sitting in this room who could prove that that is not so. Right? Yes, somebody had his hand up. Yes, Donna. Joy is a feeling, and it belongs to the fourth dimension. There isn't any joy in the third dimension.
Is sadness a feeling or an emotion?
Sadness is an emotion. Now, I'm going to tell you something interesting, though. There's a therapy that recalls way back to childhood and even beyond. And in recalling injuries of the past and things like that have been keyed in, you may have a problem. Like my husband had one with a pain in his shoulder where he couldn't lift his shoulder. He went back and ran the thing out. The pain left immediately and has never come back. But there's an interesting thing with that therapy. You can erase pain. Pleasure.
That
You cannot erase it. It's there forever. If it's real pleasure. Now, you got the whisperers saying, oh heavens, the drug takers, the alcoholics, the everything. Along with the suggestion that you can get relief or pleasure, comes the hypnotic suggestion, there's pleasure there. And that's why we use sex as a drug, we use drugs as drugs, we use booze as drugs, we use food as drugs, we use everything in the world that we reach out to, all the compulsions, as drugs, because there is a suggestion, unfortunately established, at the instant that the compulsion is established, there's pleasure there. And that's the brainwashing, is that we've been brainwashed to believe there's pleasure there. Anybody who's ever been in the grip of drugs or alcohol or compulsive overeating or anything and then been freed from it, as for instance, I was freed from smoking. I had a healing. I didn't have to quit. It just went off. Do you think I would go back to that for anything in the world? There was no pleasure there. But at the time when I couldn't free myself from it, I believed there was pleasure there. That's a hypnotic suggestion. And we are filled with them as human beings. And my word, look at your billboards, look at your television, and see how many hypnotic suggestions are beamed at us every day that if we're not aware, we're just subject to.
In your discussion, I cannot distinguish feeling from emotion. I don't know.
I think that's all right. It takes two things take time. Three things really take time. One is to recognize when the octopus is talking to you and when it's your true, real God voice. The other is to really differentiate between feeling and emotion. And the other one is to make contact with this valid voice that you have within you. Those don't happen overnight. You learn a little bit by checking it out, by the result of how you deal with it. When you deal with it correctly, if it is an emotion, it goes away. If it's a feeling, it doesn't go away. But a feeling is never destructive. Emotions are. So, be satisfied for the moment to accept the rule of thumb that an emotion always has a piece of dialogue connected with it. So if you're not sure, is this a feeling or is it an emotion, search for dialogue. And if there's anything you want to say with your mouth about it, it's an emotion.
Can I assume that emotions are bad?
Oh, no. Because the minute you talk about bad and good, you throw yourself right back into the 3D world. And we're wanting out of that. Because it's a 3D world that deals with pairs of opposites. In the fourth dimension, there are no pairs of opposites. There's no sick and well and rich and poor and bad and good. Those labels are what keep us in bondage. There's only one label that is valid. It's real or it's not real. Let me give you an example. Suppose you had been brought up and been conditioned in the belief that 2 times 2 is 5. Is that evil? No, it's just error. You see what I mean? What is real, and what is not real is not real. And the whole purpose of this is to teach us how to differentiate what's really real from what we only thought was real. And we let the thought was real go and cling to the real. But that, this is a class, it's a training process, a retraining process. You have to be willing to let the time pass for that to do it. But you keep asking your questions, because every time you hear the answer, it's going to clarify it for you. And I don't mind answering the same question 100 times. I've done it for everybody. Yes. Nope. Nope. Only feelings, not emotions.
But if you feel, let's say you feel in your days of life bad about something, and you want to express.
You not only can express your feelings, you're obligated to express your feelings. It's a non-negotiable.
So you're calling it feelings.
Yeah.
So,
for instance, it's absolutely valid to say to somebody, when you do that, it makes me feel sad. Or when you do that, it hurts my feelings.
right.
But there's no dialogue such as, shame on you, you shouldn't, oh, you always, blah, blah, blah. You see?
Yeah.
Just, I feel hurt. There's no dialogue with that. It's just a feeling.
Right.
Yes.
Emotions are something I can get rid of by myself.
Yes.
I don't need to lay that on anybody else. If I'm feeling emotional about something, I can scream or cry or hit something or whatever, and it's gone and it never comes back. But when a true feeling, if I don't express it in the right way to the person that I'm having that feeling about, it's there.
All feelings have to be expressed. I don't want to get into that because it's coming down the line in a non-negotiable. But to express your feelings is a non-negotiable in a relationship. A relationship cannot survive where the two parties do not express their feelings.
I just find out that I've never found it necessary to lay the emotions on the subject, another person to my emotions.
Oh, we don't have the right to subject anybody with our emotions. No, you see, the emotion is something that has been brainwashed on you by your own octopus, and nobody else in the world is responsible for it. So you don't have the right to lay that on anybody else. You have an obligation, if you're in a relationship, to express your feelings. And I don't want to get into that right now because it's coming down the line and we're not going to have time enough item by item. In fact, I have only a few minutes now to get into non-negotiable number 2. But before I do that, if anybody has a real, hot question that he would like to ask or yes, Jason. Oh no, pain is pain. I mean, literally, it isn't a feeling and it isn't an emotion. It's pain. It is a nervous stimulus in your physical instrument.
But if you had seen your shoulder moving back like this, if you didn't have that.
That's right.
So you didn't have it. That was real, you had it, and all of a sudden it's gone.
It was a pain that was tied in on his track due to a previous life experience. And when he went back, no, he didn't have any particular emotion about it. It was a pain. But when he went back and ran that out, pain went and never came back. the thing about that kind of thing, and that's really another subject, I can't take too much time to, because it's a whole class in itself, is there pre-existence or not? And I'm really not in a position at this point. That's not this class. Due to a previous life experience, he drew some conclusions that went on his tape recorder. And in due course, in this particular lifetime, that got keyed in and caused the pain, even though the stimulus was not there in this lifetime. Simply was on the tape. I'm not going to get into that. I have whole classes on that subject. The tapes can be listened to, and that's not the subject of this class. So I do have to hold on the questions to the point at hand. Yes?
What do you do with someone who can be rude 1 minute and a couple of days later be courteous? I mean, I think we all have someone.
It's for the individual to decide whether he has a contract with that person or not, and whether he wants one or not. If anybody breaks the contract by not fulfilling a non-negotiable, the contract is broken, null, void, and non-existent.
Well, don't we, I mean, I naturally assume I have a contract with everybody I run into. I assume that right away.
Well, but if you don't have, no. I just answered Toss in exactly the same way. You do not have a contract with anybody who doesn't know that he has a contract with you. Contract, by definition, implies two. There have to be two parties to a contract. A contract with only one party is non-existence. That's a non sequitur. Can't exist. It's like 2 times 2 is 5. Contract has to be between, by definition.
And you would, in dealing with people that we see a lot daily, there's nothing verbalized about, well, we got a contract between the two of us. Should that be verbalized?
Well, if you want that person to fulfill the non-negotiables, it has to be verbalized. It has to be contracted for.
Once against that,
absolutely. No, I mean by that, you can behave as you're part of every relationship you have with any person you come into contact with. Your standard of behavior can rise high enough that you are constantly behaving in accordance with the non-negotiables. That doesn't mean that anybody out there is going to do that.
All right.
Well, isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, you don't have the right to expect that they will.
I know. That's what I'm asking. I said, if there is somebody like that, we're not obligated to change. I'm not obligated to try to get them to change anything.
Hey, wait. God grant me, one of our wisdoms, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, the wisdom is the courage to change the things I can. What can I change? Me. That's all. I cannot change anybody out there. Right?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I really
You're not happy with the answer, I know.
everything you're saying.
Yeah, but you wish they would be. Yeah, you wish they would be different, right? But you wish they would be different. All right, now I'm going to be practical, because we are practical. We're totally pragmatic in this work. If somebody's behaving towards you in a way that you don't like, you don't have to put up with that from anybody. Put your fingers in his eyes. Back off, brother. You can't talk to me that way. You can't deal with me that way. Wait a minute. You know the language for that? Excuse me, but I don't tolerate that from anybody. That's the dialogue. You have to mean it, and if you do mean it, they will know that. We finally got you an answer. No, that's the perfect dialogue. I will not tolerate that from anyone. Somebody else had his hand up. It must be a hot question. Really hot. Okay. Non-negotiable number 2. Now remember, this is a little more difficult. The negative is aggressive behavior. The positive side of that coin is sensitivity to me as a person. How many sins do you think I committed under that number 2? Haven't all of us been in relationships where we have sweat blood to try to explain ourselves to somebody so that we would be seen correctly and understood? If you're dealing with somebody's octopus, forget it. Can't happen. The octopus has no intention of understanding you or seeing you as you are. So, what is your choice, Curtis? I will not tolerate your aggressive behavior. Now, what is aggressive behavior? Yelling, physical abuse, and a terrible one, ignoring me. Ignoring me. I know husbands and wives where one or the other has never been seen by the other one at all. They see the outward image, and that's it. They have never seen into that organism as a person. So to be ignored is terribly aggressive behavior. Not seeing me or hearing me. Have you had a relationship where you thought you were telling somebody something, and 2 days later the person said, "You never told me"? Yes, I did. No, you never told me. And little by little you catch on. I wasn't heard. I had that happen to me not too long ago, recently, and it was terribly funny because the person said, "Well, I was thinking of something else." I said, "That's precisely what I said." Is that you were not hearing me. An automatic tin ear. Kids develop it. You know that. They can tune you out just like that. And especially if you nag, they tune you out quicker. This is not a class in parent-child relationship, but you better get your kid one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball, if you really want to be heard. It doesn't hurt with adults either. All right. Yelling, physical abuse, ignoring me, not seeing me or hearing me. And then the worst one of all, and the most aggressive behavior of all, anything that makes me feel powerless is aggressive behavior. That can be, of course, if you're a mouse, it can be yelling, can make you feel powerless. Depends on if you were brought up around yelling parents, and then your boss yells at you, that'll trigger that for sure. Or it can be, when I was working for the other small newspaper, I went in to see the superintendent of schools who was in big trouble, and I went in to interview him, and he was a tall man with a big chest, and he stood up from behind his desk, and he came around very close, and he just kept taking that chest up and up and up and up and looking down his nose at me, and he said, "You know, I keep a gun in my desk drawer." Well, he failed because he didn't make me feel powerless. But he sure tried. And any kind of behavior like that makes me feel powerless, you are being aggressive against me, and I am ready to say, I will not tolerate that. Question. Yes.
I think it's true that powerless is whether I feel powerless when you do something, or whether I feel powerless because you do that to me.
Both.
Like if I feel powerless to do something, and then there's nothing else that you can do, and there's a lot of emotions that I'm going to do if I can be powerless. Whereas I can feel powerless around people, and maybe it can be totally my difficulty, not just the other person doing it.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. In this fourth dimensional absolute situation that we are talking about, I would not consciously do anything, and I'm not holding myself up as a paragon, I mean I generically. I would not do anything that I was aware would make you feel powerless. I don't care where it comes from. If it came from a brutal mother as a child or something, you know, and you said to me, when you do that, you remind me of my mother. And I make him feel powerless. I would not do that.
So if I could do better when you think spiritually, that makes